Welcome to our deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck by Mark Manson. You sent in some pretty interesting excerpts, and we're here to help you kind of break them down and figure out what it all means. It seems like at the core of it, you're looking for ways to, I guess, manage stress better, maybe worry a little bit less about things that, don't really matter. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I think that's a really good summary. Manson's approach, it's all about choosing your battles wisely, right? It's not about being apathetic or not caring about anything, but rather about deciding where you want to direct your energy and attention.
Okay, so let's dig into that a little bit. Manson talks about this thing he calls the feedback loop from hell, right?
Yes, exactly. And this is something I think we can all relate to in some way. We're constantly bombarded with images of like perfect lives, perfect relationships, perfect bodies, especially on social media. And it can make us feel like we're not doing enough or that we're somehow failing.
Exactly. And so then the more we chase this kind of elusive idea of happiness, the more inadequate we feel, which just feeds the loop.
Right. It's like we're stuck on a treadmill, what psychologists call the hedonic treadmill. We're
Mhm.
constantly striving for more, but never quite reaching a point of lasting satisfaction.
So how do we get off this treadmill? What is the alternative?
Well, Manson suggests that maybe we're looking for happiness in the wrong places to begin with. He argues that true happiness doesn't come from avoiding problems altogether, but from finding problems that we actually enjoy tackling, that we find meaningful and engaging.
Okay, I like that. So it's not about having like a problem-free life, but about choosing the right problems to focus on.
Exactly. And he uses this funny analogy. I won't spoil it for you, but it involves a panda and disappointment. But the point is, problems never really go away completely. They just evolve. We trade in our old problems for new ones, maybe more challenging ones, but hopefully more fulfilling ones in the long run.
I love that. It's so true. Now, I know you're a musician, right? How do you think this idea of choosing your struggles applies to, say, your creative pursuits?
Well, it's about understanding that the path to any goal, any creative goal, any goal in life is going to be filled with obstacles, challenges, setbacks. That's just part of the process. The key is to be passionate enough about that end goal that you're willing to embrace the struggle, the journey itself.
So for a musician, it's not just about like dreaming playing these sold-out shows or whatever, but it's about being willing to put in the hours of practice, deal with the rejections, navigate all the ups and downs that inevitably come with, building a career in music.
Absolutely. It's about loving the process as much as the outcome. And that's where I think self-awareness comes in, which is another big theme in the book.
Yeah, self-awareness, that's huge.
Right. We all have these blind spots, these biases, assumptions that shape how we see the world and react to things.
You know what? This actually reminds me of something. Just the other day, my wife and I were, just hanging out, and she instantly knew I was upset about something, even though I thought I was, like, hiding it perfectly. I guess that's a classic example of a blind spot.
Yeah, definitely. It is. We all have those. The key is to start peeling back those layers, kind of like an onion, of self-awareness so we can understand our own patterns, tendencies.
Okay, so peeling back the layers, the self-awareness onion, how do we actually do that? What are some practical steps, I guess, people can take?
I think it starts with paying attention to your emotions, your reactions, your thoughts, noticing when you're feeling defensive or judgmental, and then kind of asking yourself, why? Like, why am I reacting this way? Therapy can also be a really great tool for uncovering those deeper patterns that we might not even be aware of.
So it's like holding up a mirror to yourself and being really honest about what you see, even if it's not always flattering. But isn't there a danger in becoming too self-aware? Like, could it lead to just overthinking everything and then not taking action?
That's a great question. I think that's a really important point. Self-awareness can definitely be a double-edged sword, but I don't think Manson's advocating for like endless self-scrutiny. It's more about finding a balance, understanding your limitations, yes, but then taking action despite them.
Right. So it's not about getting stuck in your head, but about using that self-awareness to make more conscious choices about, well, about everything.
Absolutely. And those choices, as we've been discussing, they often involve saying no to things that don't align with our values, even if it's uncomfortable. And that's another big piece of this whole puzzle.
Yeah, the importance of saying no. Definitely a major theme in the book.
Right. It ties back to this idea of choosing our struggles. If we're constantly saying yes to every opportunity, every request, every demand on our time and energy, we end up spreading ourselves way too thin. And then we end up neglecting what really truly matters to us in the process.
This makes me think about your experience traveling all over the world. Do you think that saying yes to every experience could actually be detrimental to the overall journey?
Hmm. That's a really interesting question. And honestly, yeah, I think there's a risk of diluting the experience if you're constantly chasing the next thrill, the next Instagrammable moment. Sometimes saying no allows you to fully immerse yourself in the present moment and truly appreciate what's right in front of you, you know?
It's like being selective with your experiences rather than just trying to do it all and see it all and be it all.
Exactly. And that selectivity requires, I think, a clear understanding of what your values are, what your priorities are, what you stand for, what you're willing to fight for.
So it's not just about saying no for the sake of it, but it's about aligning your actions with those values that you've identified as being important to you.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another fascinating concept that Manson explores in the book, the idea that romantic love, as it's often portrayed, in movies and books and stuff, can actually be a form of entitlement.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting. Tell me more about that.
Well, he argues that the way we often idealize romantic love, this expectation of constant bliss and fulfillment, can lead to really unhealthy relationship patterns. And ultimately, it leads to a lot of disappointment.
Yeah, he even compares it to like a drug, right? I remember something about it stimulating the same part of the brain as cocaine.
Yeah, exactly. He draws a parallel between that initial rush of romantic love, those butterflies, and the dopamine hit that you get from cocaine. Both are incredibly pleasurable in the short term, but they can lead to problems if we become too dependent on them for our happiness.
So what's the antidote to this potentially like unhealthy view of romantic love? How do we build relationships that are grounded in reality but that are built to last?
Well, I think it starts with setting realistic expectations, understanding that no relationship is going to be perfect all the time, and that's okay. And it requires a willingness to be honest and vulnerable with your partner, even when it's uncomfortable.
Like that example he gives about, was it about his wife's fashion choices? I think it was, right? Sometimes he'll tell her honestly if he doesn't love an outfit,
Yeah.
even if it's not what she wants to hear.
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of honesty, even if it's difficult in the moment, it can actually build trust and strengthen the relationship in the long run. It shows that you value your partner's opinion, you respect them enough to be open and authentic with them, even about the tough stuff.
It's about creating a space where you can both, be yourselves fully, flaws and all.
Exactly. And that brings us to the importance of boundaries, which, this is something that comes up a lot in Manson's work. Being able to say no to your partner and also being able to accept no from them is crucial for maintaining a healthy balance of needs and values within the relationship.
So boundaries aren't about like being controlling or selfish. It's about respecting each other's individuality and creating that space for personal growth, both individually and as a couple.
Exactly. And it's about understanding that sometimes saying no, even to someone you love, can be the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for them.
This is all making me think about that incredible story you shared about standing on that cliff in Portugal.
Hmm.
You mentioned it was like a real turning point for you. Can you tell us a bit more about that experience?
Yeah, of course. It was one of those moments where, you're just confronted with the vastness of the universe, the beauty of nature, and also the fragility of your own existence. It was pretty powerful.
Wow, that sounds incredibly moving. What was going through your mind at that moment as you stood there on that cliff?
It's hard to put into words, but I think I was just overwhelmed by this sense of awe, and also a little bit of terror, awe at the beauty and power of nature, but also terror at the realization of my own mortality. Like, wow, life is finite.
I can only imagine. So how did that experience, how did it change you? How did it impact your outlook on life?
It really made me realize that, life is precious, life is fleeting, and we really shouldn't waste our time on things that don't truly matter. It's like all the superficial worries and anxieties, they just kind of melted away, and I was left with this profound sense of clarity and purpose.
So it sounds like that experience, as intense as it was, kind of forced you to confront your own mortality and really evaluate what you wanted your life to be about.
Absolutely. And it led me to a much deeper appreciation for the present moment, and a greater willingness to just let go of things that were holding me back from truly living. It's like Manson says, confronting our own mortality, even though it can be scary, it can be a really powerful catalyst for personal growth and transformation.
That's incredible. So in a way, it sounds like that cliff experience really helped you to embrace this subtle art of not giving a feck, right?
Yeah. I think that's a great way to put it. Yeah. Yeah, it's like Like Manson says in the book, death is this universal truth, right? It's the one thing we all have in common. And in a way, it's what gives life meaning. And
Yeah.
by acknowledging our own mortality, we can kind of break free from all those petty anxieties and worries that tend to consume us.
Yeah, that's such a powerful way to think about it. It's like by accepting that our time here is limited, we can actually live more fully and intentionally.
Exactly. And this actually reminds me of another story from the book. Manson talks about Hiru Onoda, the Japanese soldier who refused to surrender even after World War II had ended.
Oh, yeah. I remember that story. He's like hiding out in the jungle for decades, right? Still convinced that the war was going on.
Yeah, it's a pretty remarkable example of how clinging to a belief, even when it's, demonstrably false, can give a person a sense of meaning and purpose.
And when he finally returned to Japan after all those years, he was totally disillusioned, right? It was like the world had moved on without him. And his entire immortality project, as Manson calls it, had been for nothing.
It's a powerful cautionary tale about the dangers of, clinging to values that are based on external validation or societal expectations. Like, what happens when those external structures crumble? We have to build our own meaning. We have to find our own internal compass.
And that's where I think the subtle art of not giving effect comes in, right?
Yeah.
It's about choosing values that are authentic to us, not just the values that society tells us we should have.
Precisely. It's about taking responsibility for creating our own meaning and purpose rather than relying on external sources for validation.
Okay, but how do we actually do that?
Yeah.
Like, how do we even figure out what our values are, and then, how do we actually start living in alignment with them?
It's definitely a process of self-discovery. And it often involves a lot of trial and error, honestly. It's about paying attention to what brings you joy, what motivates you, and what you're willing to sacrifice for, what you're willing to struggle for.
Yeah, I like that. So it's like we're all constantly experimenting, trying different things, and then seeing what really resonates with their souls.
Exactly. And as we learn and grow, our values might change, they might shift and evolve. It's not about finding this set of fixed, unchangeable values and then just clinging to them for your life. It's more about being open to new experiences and allowing our values to adapt as we do.
Right. So it's not about like finding the right answers, in some kind of absolute sense, but it's more about embracing the journey of self-discovery and being okay with the fact that, we're probably never going to have it all figured out.
Absolutely. And that's where I think the courage to not give effect comes in. It's about being willing to challenge our own beliefs, step outside our comfort zones, and embrace the uncertainty that comes with personal growth.
Yeah. So it's not about being reckless or indifferent. It's more about being like selective with our energy and attention and really focusing on what truly matters to us.
Exactly. And that selectivity, as we've talked about, often requires us to say no to things that don't align with our values, even if it means, disappointing others or making them uncomfortable.
Speaking of discomfort, I remember another powerful story from the book about Meredith Maran, the journalist, who realized she had invented a memory of being abused by her father.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's a really profound example of how our brains can create these incredibly elaborate narratives, sometimes to protect us, sometimes to make sense of really difficult experiences, but sometimes those narratives are just false.
And it highlights, for me at least, the importance of always questioning our own beliefs, like being open to the possibility that we might be wrong and being willing to revise our stories as we gain new information and insights.
It's like we're all in this giant experiment, right? Just kind of figuring things out as we go along, pushing different buttons to see what happens.
And sometimes we're pushing the wrong buttons
Mm.
or, we're telling ourselves stories that are no longer serving us.
And that's okay. That's part of the process. The key is to be willing to adjust course,
Yeah.
learn from our mistakes and keep searching for the truth, even when it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, so it's not about being right all the time. It's about being open to learning and growing and, even if it means admitting that we were wrong about something.
Right. And I think that humility, that willingness to let go of our need to be right all the time can be so freeing.
Okay, well, we've covered a lot of ground here. We talked about the feedback loop from hell, that whole idea of the hedonic treadmill, the importance of choosing our struggles, and even embracing failure.
We've talked about the self-awareness onion, right? The power of saying no, the potential pitfalls of seeing romantic love as a form of entitlement, and those really profound implications of confronting our own mortality.
And, through it all, this theme of not giving effect has kind of woven its way through our entire conversation.
Yeah.
Again, I think it's important to emphasize that it's not about apathy. It's not about indifference.
It's about being selective with our energy and attention. It's about choosing the things that really matter to us, the things that align with our values, and focusing our frex on those.
So what does this all mean for our listener? How can they start applying the subtle art of not giving effect to their own life?
I think it starts with identifying those values. The values that are driving their decisions, their anxieties, their fears.
And then asking themselves, are these the values I really want to live by? Like, are these the facts that I actually want to give?
Yeah. Are there better, more meaningful struggles out there that are waiting to be embraced?
Right. It's about taking that step back, looking at your life from a fresh perspective, and really asking yourself, what do I truly care about? What am I willing to fight for? What brings me joy? What makes me feel alive?
And then having the courage to say no to everything else.
It's about recognizing that we all have a limited amount of time and energy, and we can't do it all, right?
So we have to choose wisely. We have to choose the things that matter most and let go of the rest.
It's about simplifying our lives, decluttering our minds, and creating space for what truly matters.
And remember, it's a process. It's not like a one-time decision, but a daily practice of aligning our actions with our values.
Yeah, it's about being mindful, being present, being aware of where we're directing our energy and attention, making sure that we're investing it in things that are truly meaningful and fulfilling.
It's about creating a life that's in alignment with our authentic selves, even if it means going against the grain or challenging societal expectations.
Okay, well, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I just want to encourage our listener to embrace this subtle art of not giving a feck in their own way, in a way that feels authentic to them.
It's definitely not a one-size-fits-all approach, right? It's about finding what works for you and having the courage to live a life that's true to yourself, even if it means ruffling a few feathers along the way.
It really sounds like this whole not giving a feck philosophy is ultimately about taking ownership of your life and your choices, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to sum it up. It's about recognizing that we actually have the power. We have the power to decide what matters to us and what we're willing to give our energy to.
And it's not about, being selfish or indifferent to the needs of others.
Exactly. It's about setting healthy boundaries, both for ourselves and in our relationships. It's about being selective with our frex so that we can actually show up more fully, be more present for the things and the people that truly matter.
Yeah. It's funny because when you first hear the title of the book, it almost sounds like he's like advocating for this nihilistic, nothing matters attitude, right?
Right. I can totally see how someone might get that impression just from the title alone, for sure. But as we've been discussing, it's really the opposite. It's about caring deeply about the things that are aligned with your values, with what truly matters to you, and then letting go of the things that aren't.
So it's not about not caring. It's about caring more selectively.
Exactly. And that selectivity allows us to really channel our energy, our attention, towards creating a life that is both meaningful and fulfilling.
And that often means saying no to things that don't align with our values, even when it's difficult or uncomfortable.
This makes me think about, I think you mentioned this earlier, about your experience living in Russia, right? You talked about how the culture there is so much more direct, more honest, and how that felt kind of jarring to you at first.
Oh, yeah, it was definitely a culture shock for sure. But after a while, I started to appreciate the lack of pretense, the emphasis on authenticity. It was
Yeah.
refreshing to be in a place where people were just willing to say what they really thought, even if it wasn't always sugar-coated or whatever.
Yeah, and that kind of directness, that willingness to just speak your truth, can be incredibly liberating. It frees you from that burden of trying to please everyone all the time, and it allows you to be more true to yourself.
It's like Manson says, that desire for approval, it's a
Mhm.
trap. The more we try to please everyone, the further we drift from our own authentic selves.
And the more we try to control how other people perceive us, the less control we actually have over our own lives.
Right. So it's about letting go of that need for external validation
Yeah.
and really finding that validation from within.
Exactly. It's about trusting that the right people, the people who truly matter, will appreciate us for who we are, even if we're not always perfect or agreeable.
Okay, so let's say someone is listening to this and they're feeling overwhelmed. They're feeling like they're giving too many fracks about things that don't really deserve their attention.
Hmm.
What would you say is like the first step towards embracing this subtle art?
Hmm. I think the first step is just to pause, Take a deep breath, step back from all the chaos of daily life and ask yourself, what do I really care about? Like, what are the things that truly bring me joy? What are the values that I want to guide my decisions, my actions?
It's like taking inventory of your life
Right.
and really identifying those things that are truly important.
Exactly. And once you have a clearer sense of those values, then you can start making choices that are more in alignment with them. You can start saying no to the things that don't matter and yes to the things that do.
And remember, it's a process. It's not about being perfect or getting it right all the time. It's about being willing to experiment, learn from your mistakes, and just keep moving forward.
Yeah, and be kind to yourself along the way, right? Change is never easy and it's okay to, stumble and fall. The important thing is to just keep getting back up and keep striving to live a life that feels true to you.
Well, this has been an incredibly insightful conversation. I feel like I have a whole new perspective on this subtle art of not giving a feck. Any final thoughts for our listeners before we wrap things up?
I would just encourage them to embrace the freedom that comes with, choosing their francs wisely. It's a journey for sure, a journey of self-discovery and growth, and it's full of both challenges and rewards. But ultimately, it's about creating a life that is authentic, meaningful, and fulfilling.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And to our listeners, remember, you have the power to create a life that you love. Start by choosing your francs wisely, and the rest will follow. We'll see you on the next deep dive.